Shri Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Arigor Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan ki jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Mayapur Dham ki jai. Jagannath Puri ki jai. Tulsi Maharani ki jai. Bhakti Devi ki jai. Samaveda Bhaktavrinda ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today we're continuing the reading of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita Volume 1, Chapter 10, This Momentous Hour of Need. Srila Prabhupada has taken sannyas. He's still staying at the Keshigat. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Radha Bansi Gopalji Temple. He's preparing the rooms at Radha Damodar Temple but hasn't shifted yet. It's now, Prabhupada took sannyas in September 1959. And in October of 1959, Srila Prabhupada noticed an article in the Times of India about the discovery of the anti-material particle and how the two Nobel Prize winners have come to the conclusion that there is an anti-material world aside from the material world that we're living in. So while Prabhupada was living in Chippiwada, in his little room at the Radha Vallabh Temple, he wrote his first book. So we have a little, just 19 slides of this description of 1960 of what Srila Prabhupada was doing. Now Prabhupada wanted to make this into a separate book, but he didn't have enough money. And Hidsaran Sharma, who he was still trying to print with at that time, the Radha Press in Gandhinagar. If anyone knows Delhi, Gandhi Market, Gandhinagar is on the other side, is Jamuna Par. So Prabhupada would walk across the Jamuna River on the old bridge to get there almost every day from Chippiwada, Old Delhi. And because he didn't have enough money to print this book as a separate book, then because he was still printing from February until September, twice a month he was printing his Back to Godhead magazines, he decided to put this book into an article form that filled two of his Back to Godhead magazines. The book, when it was finally printed, this is the inside page, and Dr. Y.G. Nayak, of the Dean of the Gujarat University, he wrote an appreciation of the book that was included afterwards. This book, Srila Prabhupada dedicated to the scientists of the world with the blessings of his spiritual master, Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj. Prabhupada took no credit for himself. Everything went to his spiritual master. Now the next page was a list of Prabhupada's to-be-printed books because we know that he was just printing his Back to Godhead magazines. He was preparing the Srimad Bhagavatam at that time, typing on his little typewriter, page by page. And in his Back to Godhead magazines, he was printing his other manuscripts. So the Science of Devotional Service to the Lord, that's the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srila Prabhupada was putting in the Back to Godhead magazines. Message of Godhead, we now have that as a small book. because Prabhupada's manuscripts were found, and one by one, just as Easy Journey to Other Planets, these books have been printed. The Supreme Dictator, that's a book that I've never seen. It must have been in one of the manuscripts, but we've never printed it. It might be under a different name. Practical Theism and Gita Upanishad. Gita Upanishad is Bhagavad-Gita as it is, or Bhagavad-Gita Yatharup. Then the Back to Godhead magazine, of course, Prabhupada continued. And everything was done under the direct order of his spiritual master. The cost price of Back to Godhead magazine at that time was 6 paisa. Now, when in America, the Easy Journey to Other Planets was first printed, this was the cover. And you'll see the devotee going from the material world into the anti-material world. And notice his japamala. His japamala is going right into his navel. So we were told that our japamala is our umbilical cord that takes us and connects us to the spiritual world. So this was painted by one of the devotees in America. Then came many, many other covers. I'm just showing you examples. As the devotees painted more pictures, they got more artistic. Here they show the Kundalini yogi meditating, and out of the top of his head comes a lotus with Radha and Krishna in the center. Now we have even more with the background. Now this Easy Journey to Other Planets, being Prabhupada's first book, it's probably been printed now in 87 different languages. And the most recent language that we just received, none of us will be able to read this. This is in a language called Amharic. Amharic is the language where the people of Ethiopia speak. Ethiopia is in Eastern Africa. So they've now printed Easy Journey to Other Planets in their language. This is even more, more variety. The same book with a different cover, going on now since 1960. Now we have Narada Muni going to other planets. Now we have the introduction of the Photoshop and computers. They've included everything. Now this original cover was put in the inside as one of the pictures. What was originally like a 36-page book became 105 pages because many beautiful pictures were included, including windows to the spiritual world, what goes on in that anti-material world. This is a picture of the National Museum in Delhi. Prabhupada used to visit there. He used to study at for references, he would go to the library there. And there, today we'll read about a very prominent person that Srila Prabhupada met there, Dr. P. Banerjee. And for over 1 year, Srila Prabhupada would lecture at his home in Bengali to the elite Bengali populace of Delhi. And then Srila Prabhupada left for America after that. This is the first edition, Anti-Material World, or the Kingdom of Godhead. So this is, Prabhupada printed the whole book in his Back to Godhead magazine, 4 pages each magazine. He was able to fit the whole book into 2 issues of his Back to Godhead. So the first one was the first chapter, Anti-Material World, or the Kingdom of Godhead. And then the second issue was the variety of planetary systems, where Prabhupada described the Vaikuntha planets, the Brahmajyoti, and ultimately Krishna Loka. Now we have here, Prabhupada, he was translating Ishopanishad. Now Ishopanishad, we know, has 18 mantras plus the first mantra, and the the preliminary mantra, Om Purnamadak Purnamidam. So then when we did print Ishopanishad as a book, it was first printed in America, Prabhupada had given an introductory lecture in London, in Conway Hall, about what are the Vedas. So that was included as the introduction to the Ishopanishad. But in the Back to Godhead magazine, Prabhupada was able to give his translations. Then Prabhupada, he started the Chaitanya Charitamrita translations. And we'll read a little bit about that as we go into the Lilamrita. So this is just a little view to you, you can turn it back now, of what Prabhupada was busy with in this 1960s time. Can you take this away? Oh, I'll take. Thank you very much. So with Prabhupada's Easy Journey to Other Planets that he was printing in the Back to Godhead, several Indian scientists and scholars contributed reviews, noting the book's scientific cum spiritual vision and the method of speeding over space, not by mechanical acceleration of speed, but through psychological effort and spiritual emancipation. Now, even the President of India at that time, Dr. Radhakrishna, he confirmed that unless we have evidence of the truth of religious foundations through science, the scientists will not accept religion. So both Srila Prabhupada and Dr. Radhakrishnan, they were both trying to speak in scientific terms so that the scientists would understand according to the way they understood, the way they spoke, and the way they presented things in a scientific manner, the religious and spiritual truths found in the Vedas, so they would not be accepted simply as mythology. It was only 38 pages, but it was his first publication aside from the one-page folded newspaper, Back to Godhead. He tried to distribute the little book effectively. He gave one copy to Dr. P. Banerjee of the National Museum of New Delhi. Now, Dr. Banerjee describes in 2 pages his association with Srila Prabhupada. Dr. Banerjee says, "He used to come to the library and consult some books, and I met him there. He gave me a book called Easy Journey to Other Planets. He gave me some copies to distribute for ₹1 or half a rupee each. I felt attracted to him. I thought he was a saintly person with pure devotion and without any outward glamour. He was not out to attract people just for name and fame. He had little support from anybody. He was living alone in a small room in Chippiwada. He was devoted to his studies. So I asked him, 'Sir, if you have time and you don't mind coming to my house, could you kindly come on Sundays and recite the Bhagavad in my house?' He readily agreed. He was a good scholar. He was learned in the scriptures and he was fond of communicating his ideas to others. He was a good speaker and a good conversationalist. He was very polite." So this is a whole other part of society that Prabhupada was now contacting in Delhi. Because from his residence in Old Delhi being where it's mostly businessmen, they only spoke Hindi, even they spoke Urdu there as well because the Jama Masjid Muslim population was also mixed in with the Hindu population in Old Delhi. And he had very little opportunity especially not to be able to speak in Bengali, because there were no Bengalis living there at the time. But even in English, he found it difficult to find people who spoke English there. He practically had to give his Back to Godhead magazines away for free, and he had no sales whatsoever of his Srimad Bhagavatams when they were printed. So now that he had come in contact at the National Museum with Dr. Banerjee, there was a whole new field opening up. Whatever he said very distinctly. He spoke in Bengali and explained the essence of the verses. Sometimes he also referred to the commentaries, just to give me more information. The others were not very much interested in commentary or in difficult aspects, but because he knew that I had some studies in the field, he explained the commentaries for my sake and for the sake of one or two other gentlemen who were also very elderly and very scholarly. So this is a great benefit and boon for Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada was practically giving no classes at Chippiwada. In the evenings he would offer the arti in the temple to Radha and Krishna. Other than that, throughout the day and night, even sometimes in the middle of the night, he would wake up if he remembered something and start typing. So typing he was doing all day and night without any notes, just directly typing his manuscripts. And then he and Srikant Vedi, they would walk for over 1 hour to go to the printers. Now, we explained last week that Prabhupada couldn't continue with Radha Press. Krishna Chandra Sharma, who was a devotee here, who lived in Vrindavan, he highly respected Srila Prabhupada. And his son, Hitcharan Sharma, owned the Radha Press in Delhi. But Krishna Chandra Sharma told Prabhupada, don't bother my son, because his son was there for commercial reasons. And Prabhupada wanted his books printed. But still Prabhupada would go there regularly, almost every day, and try to get his book work done with Radha Press. And he became very close with the family. Hitcharan's wife would cook him rice and curry, and whatever, he would call her Ma. And his son, Bansi Balab, he took over the press. And it was he who was interviewed who explained Prabhupada's relationship with the family and the press. But because Radha Press only had 10 point, which is very small, Hitcharan Sharma recommended the OK Press in Churiwalan, which was close to Chippiwada in Old Delhi. That was the press that Prabhupada walked 1 hour or two. So, OK, I couldn't figure out, now why in the world would someone name their press in India OK Press? So, in the deeper article that we discussed last week about Prabhupada's stay at Chippiwada, the owner of the press, his name was Kansiram, and his son's name was Omkar. So Omkar and Kansiram, that's okay. Just like we have, previously we used to do a lot of printing in Delhi with a press called Rakmo Press. So I was going there one day to make a souvenir. We'd have to spend a lot of time in Delhi before we had email and WhatsApp. We'd have to go twice a week to do our printing. So I just asked him, I said, where did you get this name Rakmo? He said, oh, well, my name is Rakesh, and my brother's name is Mukesh. So Rakmo. So they get the names like that. So OK Press, they printed all 3 volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam for Prabhupada. The gatherings at my home would be attended by about 20 or 30 people. And this is Prabhupada speaking in Bengali. You know, the Banerjees, the Mukherjees, the Chatterjees, the Gangulis, all these high-class Brahmins, Kayastha families that were posted in Delhi in government jobs. Some of them were Vaidyas, some of them had secretarial jobs in the government. So again, the Banerjees, Mukherjees, Chatterjees, how did they get these names? Well, in Bengal, they were Bandyopadhyay, Mukhodpadhyay, Chaturdopadhyay, Gangopadhyay. But the British couldn't pronounce such long words, so they just broke it in half: Chatterjee, Banerjee, Mukherjee, Ganguly. So they were known by those names in Delhi. So anytime you heard those names, you knew that they were high-class Brahmins. And these were the people that were attending these classes that Prabhupada gave. Then he would recite the Hare Krishna mantra. He would continue his explanation for 1 or 2 hours. Then he would recite the Hare Krishna mantra, and we would also take part with the kartals and harmonium. So it was a very enjoyable gathering because he made the difficult things very easy, and he explained everything to all of us according to our needs. He knew that this much is for this person, this much is intended for this man, this much for the others. After the meetings, he used to take a little rest in my house. I requested him to take meals in my house, but he said he did not take meals prepared by others. But when he met my wife, and she said she would be happy to prepare the meals, he said, "All right, I will take." Because he knew that they were Brahmin families, so he didn't mind taking. And she used to prepare meals on Sundays when he would come. Once when we were out traveling and preaching here in India, of course, we had no money, and it was very hard to travel and cook for yourself. And people would invite us to their homes for prasadam. So when we met up with Prabhupada again, we asked Prabhupada, what should we do? Because we don't know whether to accept the invitations or not. Who do we accept from? Who do we reject? So he said, you can accept invitations from our life members only. So we only had about 400 life members in the whole country at the time. But that was the impetus for them to become life members then. So he sometimes asked me how to get more and more people attracted towards this field. But as a government worker, I could not persuade anyone very openly. Because Dr. Banerjee, he was part of the National Museum. It was a government museum. Nor had I the time to organize anything on a big scale for him. This National Museum is still present in Delhi today. If you want to go there, they're closed on Mondays. So Tuesdays to Sundays, 10 to 6. If you're Indian, you can go there for 20 rupees. And if you're a foreigner, you have to pay 650 rupees. It's only for nationals. But he was not satisfied with that. He asked me if I could organize on a bigger scale. He knew that the people who attended the meetings at my house were very old, 70, 80, one was 90 years of age, retired, educated persons. It lasted for no less than a year. After that, he said he would be trying to go out to other places. This is when Prabhupada went out to America. He asked me to continue the gatherings, but I said, I am not initiated. He said I could continue anyway, because I was born as a Brahmin. He gave me the authority to continue for some time, but I could not continue because I used to go out. I lost all interest after he left. I was a government servant. So this is one thing that Achyutananda noticed when he was staying with Prabhupada at Chippiwada. That even when Prabhupada would meet someone one time, or just by a little bit of association with Srila Prabhupada while he was living in Delhi, many people became devotees. And he found that especially with the people who were living in the vicinity of Chippewa, and now we hear from Dr. Banerjee, that by Prabhupada's influence, although their jobs had nothing to do with anything spiritual, they were wrapped up in their families, just by the presence of Srila Prabhupada in Chippewa, they would call him the Bengali Baba, they would call him Swamiji, and of course the more educated people understand that he was very highly educated and scholarly sannyasi. But whether they were educated or uneducated, people became devotees just by Prabhupada's association. The little children at the Chippewa temple, Prabhupada, because the little children would come to play because all the families were living there. It was like practically like an apartment house. So the little children, he would tell them stories in front of the deities, and then he would have them play out the dramas of the stories. That's how kind Prabhupada was to the children. And he gave them all little nicknames. One was Balo, one was Babu, one was Baby, and they would call the parents Baby's Ma, Bengali style. Never call the mothers by their actual name, but according to the children's name, he would call them very politely. And they noticed how polite Prabhupada was. He never meddled in other people's business. He was always just busy typing, doing his work. And people would just voluntarily want to help Prabhupada. They would bring things for him to cook and to offer milk. And across the street, a young boy who was a pujari, he would come especially for the khichdi that Prabhupada cooked. So wherever Prabhupada went, it didn't matter what situation, who the people were, he was able to give them that Krishna bhakti just by his association. And that happened also, of course, when he came to America and started traveling around the world. Because of his purity of purpose. Purity is the force. That's the first of the four essential things in Krishna consciousness. Purity is the force, books are the basis, utility is the principle. So, by Prabhupada's purity, he touched the hearts of all the people that he met while he was staying here during this marathon program in Delhi of printing his books. Easy Journey to Other Planets had been like a warm-up for his real work of presenting Srimad Bhagavatam. But now he was even more convinced of the need for books. To preach, he would have to have books, especially if he were to go to the West. With books, he could create a spiritual revolution. There was so much literature in the West, but Westerners had nothing like this, nothing to fill their spiritual vacuum. Although he wanted to give as much time as possible to Srimad Bhagavatam, he decided to continue with Back to Godhead by using excerpts from already existing book manuscripts as articles. Occasionally, however, he would write and print a new article. In Relevant Inquiries, that's the name of one of his articles, Relevant Inquiries, he wrote, "We are just trying to make a humble attempt to save the human being by propaganda of Back to Godhead. This propaganda is not fictitious. If there is any reality at all, this propaganda of Back to Godhead is the beginning of that era of reality." Now, in this particular article, Prabhupada was very endearing, this Relevant Inquiries. He starts out with a story about his second son, who used to be with him. It was his son who used to go with him to see Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati blessed this son. So one day, he and his son were riding in a bus. And the bus, outside of the bus, a big marriage procession was going on. A little 4-year-old boy. He asked his father, "What's this?" Because little children, they're always asking questions about everything they see. Why this? What's that? Who's that? So what is this, Daddy? He said, "Oh, that's a marriage ceremony. They're getting married." So then the boy was very thoughtful, and he looked at his father and he said, "Are you married?" And, and everyone in the bus, they all started to laugh. So he used that as a beginning to this very serious article about relevant inquiries. How even the birds, as soon as they wake up, they're asking questions, where are the worms? Everyone's asking questions in this world. Some of them are relevant, some of them are irrelevant. Then he goes on to Sukadeva Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj. Now these are relevant questions. So that way, Prabhupada, he would just endear everyone, and it making it so interesting to read his articles that he wrote. So the next section will be again about Nehru. So before we get to that, in some of the other, this Back to Godhead in 1960, in February 1960, that was when Prabhupada printed The Easy Journey to Other Planets in two editions. And then in March, that was, of course we know Lord Chaitanya, he usually appears in March or end of February. So Prabhupada began his Chaitanya Charitamrita translations March of that year in 1960. And the whole 4 pages was Lord Chaitanya's Adi Lila, as much as he could put in, and then to be continued. He called it the identity of Lord Chaitanya, Chaitanya Charitamrita. Then in the April editions, he gave this relevant inquiries. And then he did a very beautiful thing. The song that we sing, Jai Radhe, Jai Krishna, Jai Vrindavan. So Prabhupada put that into an English poem. So I just want to read it to you because the way Prabhupada translated it so that it became a poem in English makes it so attractive also. Because we're used to the singing it in Bengali, but the English also, it becomes like a song itself. Glory to Radha and Krishna and Vrindavan, equally to Govinda Gopinath and Madan Mohan. Shamakund, Radhakund, Hilly Govardhan, Kalindi, Jamuna River and Faras Mahaban, Keshivghat, Bansibhat and dozens of garden, the places of pastime by Nanda's son. Glory to Nanda Yashoda and cowherds men, Sridham and friends who follow, amen. Glory to Vrishabhanu, his wife beautiful. Glory to the full moon and the town of Bull. Town of Bull means Barshana. Vrisha. Glory to Gopishwar at Vrindavan fixed. Glory to the Brahmin who Krishna mixed. That Brahmin is Madhumangal. Glory to Ramgat and Rohini's son. Glory to all who reside Vrindavan. Glory to the Brahmin's wife and mermaid. The mermaid are the Nagapatnis, who in devotional service respects paid. Glory to the arena where dance performed. Radha and Sham who bumper stormed. This bumper storm, that means they entered in to the dancing arena very quickly. Glory to the zest of excellent mellow, paramour's feelings in trance of kilo. It's Krishna Das, poet who chants, lotus feet of Janava he remembers. Krishna Chaitanya is my Lord, Radha Krishna and Lalita accord. Vishaka is there in the midst, that's my prayer in a gist. So Prabhupada, and these were the beautiful types of poetry and different works that Prabhupada would put into his Back to Godhead magazines whenever there was space. Then we go on to here. In a godless civilization, that's the name of the article that Prabhupada wrote, a godless civilization. Bhaktivedanta Swami referred to Prime Minister Nehru's complaints about the misuse of public funds in the name of religion. Now, how this happened was, we've all heard of Mount Abu. That's where the Brahma Kumaris have and the Jains have their beautiful temples. So Nehru had gone to visit there. And at that place, he gave a speech, political speech. And he complained that he felt that the collections, the funds collected for religious work, are actually being misused for personal aggrandizement, not being used for real religious work. So Prabhupada had a lot to say about that. But we'll read first what Satsvarup Maharaj has put in summary here. Prime Minister Nehru's complaints about the misuse of public funds in the name of religion. Bhaktivedanta Swami noted that although there were undoubtedly instances in which religious leaders were implicated in criminal offenses, if statistics were compared, the religious cheaters would be outnumbered by the political cheaters. Although Pandit Nehru had been right in warning of religious fraud, the warning could not be effective without a thorough reform of spiritual institutions. And that reform could be accomplished only with the cooperation of government leaders. Bhaktivedanta Swami quoted from his letter in which he had asked Prime Minister Nehru to take up the study of Bhagavad-Gita. But as he informed his Back to Godhead readers, Pandit Nehru had never replied. This is a quote from Prabhupada's article, A Godless Civilization. Because of his lack of spiritual knowledge, he thought that this institution, the League of Devotees, might be something like the so many mats and temples which have become the source of headache for the Pandit. Now, this is just one small portion. It's just two little sentences from this article that Prabhupada wrote. It was a very strong article where Prabhupada, he says that, yes, there might be some religious leaders who criminal offenses have been committed. But if you compare that to the number of, and then he goes on to write, Prabhupada, he writes, the ministers, and he gives a whole list of which type of political leaders have been committing criminal offenses, been put in jail, have to pay fines. He said, why not look at your own field of politics and clean that up first, which is much, much full of offenses than the religious leaders. But of course, Pandit Nehru never replied. So Prabhupada, at the end of the article, he makes a prayer. He first explains that every politician is ambitious to become prime minister or the president of the state, while every one of the so-called order of sadhus wants to sit on the throne of Narayan, the Lord of the universe. That's the impersonalists. After sannyas, we used to have here, now where this Krishna Bhakti, Bhakti Dham and all these places are, it used to be a big Dandi ashram. And we had many sannyasis living there. And they would all greet each other, Narayan, Narayan. Because the Mayavadi sannyasis, according to their standard, when you take sannyas, then you come up to the level of Narayan. So they would address each other as Narayan. Honestly speaking, Pandit Nehru should also warn his own henchmen more sternly than the religious heads of mats and temples. Our beloved Panditji is very much afraid of the word God or Krishna. We pray to God that good counsel may prevail upon him. So then from that article, in May, Prabhupada continues his Chaitanya Charitamrita, and then he starts Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Now, again, because Prabhupada realized that his time was limited after he came to America and had his stroke, instead of doing a verse-by-verse translation of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Prabhupada did a summary of it, and that's our Nectar of Devotion. That was one of the first books that we got to study, Nectar of Devotion. But in the Back to Godhead magazine, Prabhupada did verse by verse translation. So if any of you want to read the word for word, verse by verse translations of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Prabhupada did give them to us. He did up to sloka number 12. And those preliminary slokas in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu are the most important. Just as in Chaitanya Charitamrita, the beginning slokas, the whole rest of Chaitanya Charitamrita is an elaboration of those first 14 or so slokas. So it's the same with Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So all of you are welcome to look up. We have it in printed form, these original Back to Godhead magazines, in a book called Back to Godhead. Or on the internet, you can go into these Back to Godhead magazines and read them yourself. And you can read the original Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Now, the foreword of the Easy Journey to Other Planets, this is the foreword that Prabhupada included from Dr. Y.G. Nayak of the Gujarat College. He says, "Dear Swamiji, I am grateful to you for your kind letter. Your learned exposition of the problems of para and apara prakriti has impressed me. I appreciate your mission and would be very happy to profit by it. Please do send me the prospectus of the League of Devotees. I have a number of friends who are also interested in this mission of yours. With kind regards, yours sincerely." So this principle, Prabhupada carried on up until the end, up until 1977. That for the class, the class of people, high class, we have our books. And for the mass, we have kirtan and prasadam distribution. So even at this stage, the higher class educated scholars, the deans of the colleges and his friends, they were very much impressed by Prabhupada's, even his first little book, Easy Journey to Other Planets. And Dr. Banerjee, the class, they very much appreciated what Prabhupada was doing on a literary level. And then for the masses, Prabhupada had kirtan and he had prasad distribution. Even amongst his uneducated, the little children and the neighbors in Chippiwada, he followed that principle of books are for the class and kirtan and prasadam distribution is for the mass. So then, after that, Prabhupada, because he really had to spend most of his time on Srimad Bhagavatam, he had a mission to fulfill. And if you remember, in 1959, when Prabhupada was in 58, 59, when Prabhupada was preaching in Bombay, he had that confirmation from Mr. Chokshi, who was the personal secretary of Sumati Morarji, that yes, I will give you that free ticket, you just have to get your passport, your sponsorship, your P-form, your visa. So, and Prabhupada could not go empty-handed to America. He knew that he had to have his books ready for when he went preaching in America. So before he even attempted to get all of these other official things ready, he wanted this first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam in his hands. So he very, very systematically worked tirelessly from 1960 up until 1965 to get these 3 books printed. And most of that work was done in Chippiwada until he finally got his rooms in 1962. He moved to Radha Damodar Temple, and then he would go back and forth, spending a lot of his time in both places simply typing, preparing the manuscripts, taking them to the printer, doing all the corrections, and then getting the final printing done. And remember, Prabhupada personally had no money. All of the money that he had would go for printing, and he would get donations specifically for printing. and he was living in a very impoverished condition throughout those 5 years after he took sannyas. So, Bhaktivedanta Swami charged that Pandit Nehru thought that any spiritual organization, and this is a quote from Panditji Nehru himself, is a dungeon for accumulating public funds and then misuse it for questionable purposes. He, however, this is Prabhupada speaking now, he, however, approves of the so-called sadhus who do social service and talk nonsense in the spiritual science. This is so because he has no depth of spiritual knowledge for himself, although he is Brahmin and Pandit. Ignorance in spiritual knowledge is the qualification of the Sudras, or the laboring class. So Prabhupada was very courageous. He was speaking like this about the Prime Minister of the country in his Back to Godhead magazine. But he had to speak the truth. And therefore, the intelligent people, they were agreeing with what Prabhupada said. He requested Pandit Nehru not to be afraid of the word God or Krishna. But we can assure him that there is no such cause of fear, because Krishna is everyone's friend and able to render real help to everyone. Bhaktivedanta Swami ended by suggesting that immoral practices were not confined only to the temples of India, but were common to materialistic civilizations all over the world. In particular, he cited the disturbances amongst youth that were becoming rampant in the 1960s. So this is all quotations from Prabhupada's article called A Godless Civilization. Now this is Prabhupada, he was so worldly educated. This is what Prabhupada wrote now. The best thing will be for the physician to heal himself first. Because in godless civilization, while the occupants of the mats and temples have been the cause of headache for the Pandit, the same thing under a different label has become the cause of headache for other European and Asian statesmen. The unbridled youngsters of those countries, under the name of teddy boys in England, the rebels without a cause in America, the half-strong in Germany, the leather jackets in Sweden, and the children of the sun in Japan, and the style boys in USSR are some of the byproducts of the godless civilization. And that is the root cause of all headache. That requires a thorough treatment. So Prabhupada knew in advance, even before he left India, how the youth were so troubled at this time. For instance, in America, rebels without a cause. They were rebelling against the society that they saw, but they didn't know what the solution was. They had no other alternative. So they became hippies. So Prabhupada, when he went to America, and the newspaper reporters would ask him, what is your mission here? What have you come to America for? He said, I am going to make these hippies into happies. So this Prabhupada understood how the youth was suffering. Now also we see here in India, because of the influence of Western culture, and now with media, because before it was television, now it's internet. It's all one world now. There aren't any boundaries anymore because of the communication, the mass media. So now even the Indian youth are losing their culture, and they're becoming confused, disoriented about the purpose of their life. And by the hard work of Srila Prabhupada, and by his disciples and the disciples of his, now we're on to the 4th generation even, carrying on his mission, the youth are able to come back again to their roots here in India and all over the world, because Krishna is not, he's not only the God of India, He's in every living entity's heart. So all over the world, ISKCON is able to influence people and bring them back to the real purpose of life, which is to return to the anti-material world, the spiritual world. Now this anti-material, Prabhupada took the slokas of the Bhagavad-Gita, and wherever the word Atma was, he would replace it with the English translation of anti-material particle. So he would say the anti-material particle is never born, never dies, just as we would say as the soul goes on from one, all of those slokas in the second chapter, Prabhupada simply, he changed the wording so that the scientists could then understand what his purpose was. Now, after the article about the antimaterial proton and the antimaterial world, next, that was 1959, that article. In 1960, another article came out from Russia, in the Times of India, that one of the greatest Russian astronomers, he concluded that there must be many planets with inhabitants. But because each of those planets have a different climate, and just as on this planet we have living entities in the air, living entities on the land, living entities in the sea, he said even if we were able, with our Sputniks, to visit these other planets, we as human beings on Earth would not be able to live in those planets. So Prabhupada took that article and he took the sloka from the Brahma Samhita, Yasya Prabha Prabhavitam, let me just find it. Yasya Prabha Prabhavato Jagadanda Koti, Koti Shvashesha Vasudari Vibhuti Binam, Tad Brahma Nishkalam Anantam Ashesha Bhutam, Govindam Aripurasham Tamaham Bhajami. So Prabhupada explains from this in the translation, I serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead Govinda, the primeval Lord, whose transcendental bodily effulgence, known as the Brahma Jyoti, which is unlimited, unfathomed, and all-pervasive, is the cause of the creation of unlimited numbers of planets, etc., with varieties of climates and specific conditions of life. So this is the way Prabhupada was able to combine the scientific discoveries with the truths in the Vedas, as Brahma himself is speaking, that the Supreme Lord creates these varieties of climates and specific conditions of life. So Prabhupada was making headway under these articles by confirming what the scientists were now discovering as being the truths that have been said since the beginning of creation by Lord Brahma himself. So now is 7 o'clock. We'll continue with the next section next week. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Daivi.